pivotal role in shaping our environment and contributing to the carbon footprint. So actually, what it says is that what we're witnessing lately is that climate responsive housing and real estate embody a fundamental shift in our perspective. We cannot any longer afford to view buildings and developments as isolated entities. Instead, they must be harmoniously integrated with the natural surroundings, the cultural and the traditional settings as well. They should adapt and respond to the local climate, minimize resource consumption, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and not the least, the aspirations of people who live there. So the paradigm shift is not only an environmental imperative, but also a social, economic, and cultural one. So I suppose in this context, this session aims to explore and shed light on the critical facets of climate responsive housing and real estate. We will delve into innovative design approaches, sustainable construction techniques, possibly, energy efficient technologies, as well as organizational governance, how houses are built, who builds them, and why they are being built. Examples that empower and create a resilient, eco-friendly living spaces. Moreover, we must acknowledge that climate responsive housing and real estate are not isolated concepts, as I said earlier. They're intrinsically linked to a broader issue such as urban planning, investments, transportation, and community development and engagement. So as such, this discussion will also delve into the interconnectedness and emphasize the importance of collaborative and multidisciplinary approach. It's a hope that by the end of our session, we will have gained a deeper understanding of the potential for climate responsive housing and real estate to mitigate climate change, enhance living standards. So just look at some statistics briefly. So when it comes to global emissions, building and construction sector accounts for nearly 38% of global energy related to carbon dioxide emissions. Energy use, they are responsible for something 40% of total direct and indirect carbon emissions. Then you've got operational emissions. What are they? Operational emissions from heating, cooling, lighting, and appliances, etc., and not this cooking. Then embodied carbon. That means embodied carbon refers to the emissions associated with the manufacturing, transportation, and construction of building materials. They account for something like 8% of global CO2 emissions. So these are just some statistics to set the kind of a context in which we are working in. So we are looking into a renovation versus new construction, energy codes and standards. Do we need LEED standards, other standards we have, a BREEAM, etc. Then renewable energy, the whole quest of urbanizing world, and not the least the developing world, where 1 billion people today live in slums or informal settlements. What does it mean for them, the so-called sort of carbon footprints and housing sector? Then circular economy and carbon offsetting. So that is why climate resilience, housing, and real estate construction is closely linked to the whole social development and sustainable development, which relates to SDG goals. Yeah. So this session will have speakers. My co-moderator will be Bhuvana Nanaiah. She's an urban planner with diverse background in architectural design, urban strategy, consulting, and sustainable development. She just completed a master's program at the university in Trondheim in Norway, and she has large experience in different countries, including Nepal and Middle East and other places. And she is also engaged in cross-sector coordination, stakeholder engagement, and she also focuses on SDG 11, which is the Sustainable Development Goal for cities and towns. Then we have Mr. Benoit Molineaux, who is a physicist and climatologist, and he has been working initially as a social entrepreneur. He is a co-founder of several cooperatives, including Equilibrium Housing Cooperatives. His principal mission and goal is to contribute to development, a sustainable housing of entire neighborhood Geneva, which is in Switzerland, as you know. So Benoit also sees the cooperative as a non-profit entity at the same time relating to what shall I say, cost aspect of housing. He's a co-founder, active member of food, mobility, sanitary, and real estate initiatives involved in several neighborhoods and in Geneva. This also relates to the whole question of what you want to call as a circular economy. Then we have Suchitra Gupta, who is an excellent communicator from Jacobs Corporation. She takes initiatives and interacts well with clients, vendors, and management. Her focus is on socially and environmentally progressive ideas, concepts, and designs. She has nearly over 14 plus years of commendable experience in the field of sustainable design and development. She's recognized for her ability to provide technical leadership, and she leads a team of domain one of the largest real estate developers globally and also in India, and expertise in all major green building and wellness relating frameworks. Yeah. With that, may I then leave the word to Bhuvana, who is my co-moderator, Bhuvana Nanaiah.
Thank you for the introduction, Krishnan sir. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Bhuvana Nanaiah. I am a recent graduate of the Urban Ecological Planning Program from NTNU, Norway. I have previously worked as an architect, like Krishnan sir said, on some major urban development projects in the Middle East region. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to this session on climate responsive real estate and housing, which I believe is a subject of not just high relevance, but it's also something that demands immediate action. So as we all know, there is an urgent global need for climate action and adaptation measures to safeguard the world's population from increasing climate risks that we face. Simultaneously, many markets across different geographies, particularly in developing countries, have experienced a real estate boom. So this phenomenon is not only crucial in addressing housing crises, but is also seen as an avenue for long-term investment. So this confluence presents both a need and an opportunity to bridge the gap between climate and real estate sectors, which forms the basis of our discussion today. So in this regard, while the more popular narrative has been around, which has been around climate responsive real estate, has been mainly in terms of decarbonization of the construction industry, I also believe it is important and interesting that we discuss this transition in terms of adaptation to tackle the growing climate risks. So climate responsive real estate no longer only focuses on the physical envelope of our built environments, but I think it is important that we also consider the role of local communities, stakeholders, users of this physical form as active agents of resilience and change in creating future-proof societies. In fact, it has also been speculated that soon real estate that does not adhere to the growing climate needs will require re-evaluation. So we've already seen instances of this happening in California, where a lot of insurers have been dropping high-value real estate properties simply because it's more prone to climate risks like wildfires, for instance. So despite this, there has been a growing market confidence in taking up climate responsive real estate. But at the same time, people also have been talking about something called green premiums associated with such climate-proof real estate developments. People have been talking about how this might again be viewed as something that is fit for the elite few, and it might hinder the active uptake and upscaling of climate responsiveness in the real estate market. Furthermore, we must also take into consideration that a lot of real estate that will be used in the next couple of decades has already been built, and it is important that we reflect on how best we can incorporate climate responsiveness into our existing infrastructure. So in our session today, we have two interesting speakers that were introduced by Krishnan sir, both acclaimed professionals in the field of climate responsiveness in the built environment sector. So while their goals are very similar, that is to create a better living environment for the world, they come from really contrasting backgrounds. So this makes the session all the more interesting and all the more engaging for us, audience, and for the listeners. So We look forward to listening to more about your experiences, reflections, and thoughts about this subject. At the same time, I, for one, am interested in understanding the different challenges that you face in your respective domains and how you navigate it. So, lastly, I would like to invite our audience to leave your questions in the chat below. Not just your questions, but your thoughts, your reflections as well. So once the presentations from our speakers are over, we can have a quick question and answer session where we can keep the discussion continuing or going forward. So first, I would like to request our first speaker for the day, Ms. Suchitra Gupta from Jacobs Engineering, India, to give us her 2 cents on climate responsive real estate and housing based on her experience.
Thank you so much, Bhuvana and Krishnan sir, for the kind introduction.
You're muted,
I think it's
Suchitra.
okay. Can you hear me? Because thank you. Thank you so much, Bhuvana and Krishnan sir, for the kind introductions. I think it's literally 2 cents. That's absolutely correct, because I think the whole wave of sustainability and the amount of knowledge that it requires to work on is immense. And I've been experiencing that in the past 15 years of my work experience. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone on this call from around the world and different time zones. First of all, my sincere apologies because I have a very hoarse voice. I think I've caught a bug. I think that is with changing climates and weather that is never very reliant. So let me quickly start by, first of all, thanking the Urban Economy Forum and all the other stakeholders that were involved in creating these sessions leading up to the main Congress and organizing this very important, relevant, and timely session on climate responsive real estate. With that, let me just share my screen for the slides. Let me know once you can see it.
Yes, we see it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So the topic that I've chosen for today is talking about, let's connect the 3 dots, the 3 C's that we talk about: climate response, commercial real estate, and communities. I think these were the 3 topics of essence that I gained from the past 14 years of my experience. So just before I get into the details, a little bit more about what I do currently. So I'm a sustainability professional, an architect by education, moved into sustainability very early in my career. So pretty much all my career, I've done sustainable designs. Last year, I joined Jacobs as the sustainability manager. I head the India team. It is called BERL, Built Environment Resource Lab. And we are technical experts in built environment sustainability. A lot of my work focuses in a specific region, Saudi Arabia. We're tying up their vision of 2030. And there are a lot of giga projects that are happening, to name a few: NEOM, Roshan, and a few others. And that is where our involvement as sustainability experts in the built environment comes into picture. So on that wise, because I'll quote a lot about those projects in the coming slides, let's get started. So what I've done is I've just curated a bit of slides to take you all through a fair bit of understanding of the history of climate response, what kind of performance indicators existed. I've only taken a history of last 200 odd years, not more than that. I'm sure our history goes much long back than that. I've also looked at impact of climate change on commercial real estate in communities, how it impacts, and kind of say that why we're talking about climate change at this point in time. Third and most important, where I'll dive a little bit more on it, about talking about the matrices that are involved, how to measure them in the context of the built environment, and to end it up with the confluence of carbon and well-being, something that has been my focus area for at least for the last 5 years, and I'll talk a bit more about that. On that context, let's get started on the sustainability indicators, the history of climate response and its performance indicators. So historically, at least if I start from the 1800s, we saw, of course, the advent of industrial revolution, where everything, we coined the term assembly line, where we were looking at introducing machinery to carry out or make products on a faster pace. So profitability or more production over per unit over everything else was the starting point for us. If I trace back our history towards 1800s, we then moved into the early 1900s, where, of course, we all saw the impacts of climate change or other things that were happening in terms of environmental degradation. And we started talking about how to track carbon emissions. But again, there was nothing really done about it. It was generally business as usual. Then came mid-1900s and early 2000s, where a lot was changing geopolitically as well. And hence, a lot of laws, frameworks, and organizations were establishing their own frameworks around carbon, energy, and resource efficiency. And today's decade, which talks about well-being and circularity. I'm sure our next speaker will talk a lot more about that, but I just wanted to touch upon the topic that if you see in essence, the evolution of the indicators has for sure evolved in favor of well-being. So everything that we do in the field of sustainability evolves or revolves around well-being in today's context. So if we look at all the naysayers who say that climate change is a hoax, I just have a few slides. I've blurred this very intentionally. This is a little older version, but the whole idea of showing this is that we are at this point, the tipping point, which we are reaching very, very soon. I believe we have already reached it, but I think 2030 is that tipping point, wherein even if we look at a very intermediate scenario, we're still upping the graph and not lessening it. So that is where we start from. And even if we combine this with the financial risks or the impacts, we see that the impacts will be more pronounced beyond 2030. So just a bit of a snippet on this. As per the forecast, an increase in 3.2 degrees centigrades, which is on the higher side, in temperatures by 2050 could wipe our world's GDP by 18%. I'm just re-emphasizing on that. And the Asian economies, because I work a lot in that sector or that region, by 26.5%. And you can see the graph of all the major economies and regions. I think not one region is aloof from the changes and the financial impacts that it carries. Why it's important for us, I think Mr. Krishnan already emphasized on the energy use in buildings having a significant share in the overall energy use, the GHG emissions, both in terms of construction, the related services, and the operation side. So if we look at the annual global carbon emissions, about 40%, I've taken the liberty of rounding it off from 38 to 40% for the simple reasons that I'm sure from when the report came, we are only increasing and not decreasing on that side. So what can we do about it? I'm sure we've all set the context in terms of the alarming numbers that we have. But I think because we have a very significant share as the built environment industry or the AC industry, I think we have a lot to do or a lot to say in that. So I think if I just look at, and I'm quickly jumping on this because I need to keep some time for the Q&A, but looking at the green building activity from 2021 to 2024, two key things that I want to highlight in this graph. The people who were exploring green buildings just 3 years back, which was around 13%, has decreased to 8%. But the positive side is the 28%, which is more than 60% of the projects going green, has increased to 42%. It's certainly something that has shown that we care. As an industry, we are certainly caring about going green. Now, how we go about that is a different thing, but at least these graphs show an up towards that. So if I just bucket the key indicators into environmental reasons for building green and the social reasons for building green, and hence my third C of communities comes into picture. While we look at the left side of the graph and we know what kind of things come in, air quality is an indicator that has been increasing, if I have to highlight that, again related to well-being. But if we look at the right side of the graph, which is the social reasons for building green, I think one of the biggest indicators, which was actually not even there a few years back, which was not even being measured, promotes improved occupant health and well-being, has taken the prominence. It's the #1 indicator. And for 2021, it shows 80%. I'm sure once the next report comes out, I'm sure this is this is surpassing that number as well. And it's certainly here to stay at least for next few decades as the #1 indicator. And hence the reason for communities. So just to sum it up for this section, and then I'll move into the more technical side of things. Well-being is the cornerstone for any ESG strategy and reporting, and the numbers have shown it. Any organization, and I quote from numbers, any organization that has been good in the E side, the environment side of the ESG reporting, has shown a very positive improvement in the area of well-being. And I think that is where we start working towards sustainability in the built environment. So with that, in terms of the next section, I think I've always believed when I started my career in sustainability, what can be measured can be managed. And hence a very important part of my growth in sustainability was that I learn all the technical skills that are required to be able to evaluate designs from a technical perspective and then deliver my solutions, so that it is not about hearsay or it is obvious that this needs to happen. So everything that we do is based on all the technicalities and the information and the data that is involved. So let's try and disseminate matrices and how to measure them in the context of the built environment. So what I've done for today is I've taken 9 key components, which are very, very important in regards to the built environment. So these are basically technical capabilities that help empower sustainable decisions and optimize performance across built environments, largely be it a housing project, or be it a commercial project, be it a port project. We're doing a lot of port projects, any kind of typology. These are some of the key technical capabilities that one needs to have. And I'll show you through each of these how the impacts happen. So if I just start to dive deeper into it, and I know that I'm almost reaching time, so I'll move quickly on these. Climate analysis, something of prime importance here, because I think this is the primary reason and the first thing that we analyze so that we can understand what we are getting into. Very, very important. There are certain softwares like Climate Consultant. We use Rhino Grasshopper with the Ladybug plugin, IS software. So those are the kind of softwares we use to carry out intense analysis. I just want to highlight here one thing, that we also make the weather files wherever weather stations have been established. And this has happened in certain regions that I have talked about, I've been working on, so that we are not depending on previous data, which might not reflect the reality of today and tomorrow. So we do carry out fair understanding of the kind of weather files we're using for such analysis. And that becomes very, very important, because context is very important in such things. UTCI is again something I want to emphasize on the urban level, on the outdoor level. And this is one area I feel is pretty much missed out in terms of analysis. Very important portion or part of technical analysis for sustainability that needs to happen. Won't dive deep into it, but just to emphasize the importance of carrying out outdoor thermal comfort analysis is to understand, and with the ever-changing environment that we are in, I think urban heat and global warming has just changing the environment every other year. So whenever we're planning, we need to plan for the next 10, 20 years. And this a tool called UTCI Urban Thermal Comfort Index, at least we use that, comes very handy in terms of understanding where we are for the development and what kind of strategies we can do, and emphasize on the fact that this becomes very, very important. Again, shading, massing, and daylight analysis, something that is been happening for at least for the past decade. So I won't emphasize a lot. I think this has still become a standard norm, but we need to keep improving in terms of the technical capabilities. Energy modeling is something, again, I think the world has picked up on this and becomes a very, very important tool for all the decision making for what kind of energy we are putting into the building and other areas we can improvise upon. Life cycle assessment is again something I'll spend a bit more time on. So we did talk about embodied carbon and the whole cycle of the life cycle assessment for materials. So we emphasize a lot on this because that is an ask, a very clear KPI given to us with the kind of regions and projects that we work on. But again, something I feel at large is missing out. So something that should be brought in both from a design perspective and also from construction and operations perspective. But just to highlight, an embodied carbon decision has to be taken very early. If it is not taken, it will stay forever. You can do a lot during the operational stages to reduce a lot of things. But once a decision is taken on a material, and if it is on the higher side of embodied carbon, you really can't do anything about it. And it will just stay for a very, very long duration. And hence, this becomes extremely important. And to look at embodied carbon from the perspective of all the indicators that are there is equally important. Again, renewables is something we look at from the offset perspective. So I won't dive deeper into it, but something which is very, very important for us. So just to sum it up and end up the conversation here, and I'll pass it on to the next speaker, the confluence of carbon and well-being. So the essence of whatever we're talking about today is that every impact on the carbon side of things, for example, if it is about rising ppm levels, extreme heat, it starts impacting the well-being of people at large. And I've tried to correlate each component. If it is an extreme weather event, there is loss of GDP, there is loss of livelihoods, there is a lot of loss of well-being for people in general. Air pollution, not only is it a loss of economic output, it is also a loss of increased mortality risk, decreased quality of life. So every component which we measure in terms of carbon as a metric has a repercussion, and maybe a more severe repercussion in terms of well-being. So that is where I think I would like to close. But as a society, the expectations about environmental, social, and governance considerations continue to rise. I think ignoring well-being could create a blind spot that eventually renders a society, an organization, and its people unsustainable. So I think that is something we need to really look at. With that, yeah, I'll like to sign off, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Suchitra. It was really nice to listen to all the digital tools, especially that you make use of in your decision-making process. Thanks a lot. Next, we have Benoit, who will talk to us about cooperative housing and cooperative neighborhoods. Over to you, Benoit.
Thank you very much, Bhuvana. Thank you, Anantha, for the introduction. Thank you, Mrs. Gupta, for the interesting presentation with a view, historical and quite interesting view. Well, as said, Anantha said a lot about in the introduction. I'm a real estate developer with a distinct cooperative approach and an aim of public utility, public service. So even if it is a private enterprise, our cooperatives are non-profit, so it's a special kind of real estate work. And my experience basically is in Geneva, Switzerland, all of it. So that's what I'll be talking about. So let me share the screen and try to explain how, as a physics scientist, how I got here. Share. There we go. So as said, I've been involved in a couple of cooperatives, starting with the housing co-op. Basically, a cooperative is just another type of, it's a kind of company which is owned by its, the ownership is by every member of the co-op owns it with an equal share and an equal voting decision. So it's one person, one vote. That's basically the definition of a cooperative. And it's a democracy. It's in a private company which is governed in a democratic way. And so that's what I found interesting. And basically, all our cooperatives are nonprofit. So how did I get here? My story starts in 1982 when I was 17, and our physics teacher, Mr. Brown, asked us as homework with 1 week in advance to make a small car that was powered only by a single rubber band. And a week later, we had a contest to see whose car would go the farthest. And my car looked like the top picture here, which made it from technical Legos. And I was really proud because it started really fast and I was the first in the race. But then my friend Philip's car, he did with compact disc, and it was really slowly moving, but then he went twice as far as every other car. So I learned a lot that day about energy, how to harness energy, and I think it gave me real interest in physics. So I studied physics, and in 1980, and being quite old has an advantage is that when you look back, you can see what predictions came true and which didn't come true. So one prediction that came true and was made in 1982, we all learned this a lot later, but it's scientists from ExxonMobil who were mandated to try and predict global temperatures. And this is the gray lines are the predictions they made back in 1982, so around here. And the red line is the observed temperature. So they were quite spot on. Don't ask me why ExxonMobil did nothing about it and tried to hide this report. That's another story. Couple of predictions that certainly didn't come true or even dramatically untrue that I heard in 1993 when I was doing my PhD on climate science. And I heard a lot about this and I actually believed it 30 years ago. Now I understand with the looking back, it was really untrue. Growth can be dematerialized. I don't believe that at all anymore. People were telling us more roads is less traffic. Technology will save us. Solutions will emerge naturally from the free market economy. And one day we'll discover a new source of energy. Basically, in physics, you can't create energy. So energy can only be transformed. So what's next? Going back 50 years ago, I think you've all heard of the Club of Rome and the Meadows report, which predicted that as consumption and population increases, resources decrease, and you reach a tipping point and a collapse, which they predicted it would be in 2050, somewhere around there. So we don't know yet if they were right, but they seem to be right on course. So what do you do once you've understood the science, and where do you go from there? So I sort of left the research and the academic career, and with friends and my wife, we had 3 children. This is back at about 25 years ago. We decided to create a housing cooperative, which combines in a very interesting way the economic aspect, the ecological aspect, and the social aspects. So we were right on with a sustainable development project, which is a private company. And we called it Equilibrium because we were looking for I think the only real indicator we should all be aiming at is, are we in equilibrium with what nature can provide? And here is measured in biocapacity, and the world ecological footprint is about 1.5 to 2 planet Earths when we only have 1 planet as a capacity. And if you look at the same in Switzerland, we have about, if the Swiss were limited to their own territory, we're actually consuming about 5 times what's the resources that are accessible in Switzerland. So we're quite far from the equilibrium. So this is the first building we built and in which I live, which was inaugurated in 2011. Our cooperative is actually about 20 years old, so it took a time to get the first building. It's a small building made of wood. Our second building is larger. It's insulated with straw bales. It's made of wood and concrete. Here are our 3rd, 4th, and 5th buildings, also made of wood and concrete. It's a very high level of well-being. Our inhabitants really like living there, not only because of the quality of the construction, but also because of all the community and social aspects. We have the lowest energy consumption in Geneva. These are our buildings here. So we're under 30 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. This is a building from the 1980s on the right. And these are the other lowest consuming buildings in Geneva. And the white part is the heat for the building, and the blue part is the water. So there's a lot. We haven't been able to reduce water heating, but you can see the heating for the building is very, very low. It's lower than what we need for our sanitary water. We have our own compost toilets and sanitation plants, water treatment plants for the toilets and for the gray water. We have car sharing, and we can reduce now the number of cars to 1 car for 10 families, and it's compulsory in our buildings. So is this a success story, would you say? When now we have 7 new buildings in project and construction with over 100 million francs investments over the next 4 years. But if you look back, our ecological footprint, we've been able to reduce it by a factor of 2 with all the measures I've been talking about as well, mobility, construction, and other aspects. But the aim for a sustainable way of living would be to be down to the world biocapacity, which is here at 1.7. So we've still got a long way to go. And if we want to go down to the Swiss biocapacity, we're still more than twice. We still use more than twice as much resources as we should be allowed to use. So it's not a success at all. It's a failure, actually. So how do we go farther is our things we talk about with our cooperative board. So we've got 7 employees in our cooperative, and we've got a board of deciders. There is to work at the neighborhood level. So that's our next aim. If we want to contribute to societal change, we will have to start thinking things at a neighborhood or the town level, or of course at national level. But since we're just a small co-op, we already try and work at the neighborhood level. And I was much influenced by open forums where we discussed things with many people. Here there was 170 people 2 years before moving into before the first building would be inaugurated in a neighborhood in Geneva called 𝗨𝗪𝗂. And it had a big influence on the destiny of that neighborhood, because food became one of the main aspects in the development of the neighborhood. And in this 𝗨𝗪𝗂 neighborhood, this is a true story, 4 cooperatives were created. 1 with farmers working to feed the neighborhood, 1 with artisans. There's the baker, dairy, butcher that are in the neighborhood that help to transform products and feed the people. There's a food co-op, which is citizen-owned, and there's restaurants that are for their own co-ops. And this approach brings also a lot of life and animation into the neighborhoods. So it's as well as reducing carbon, it has a social well-being aspect. So this is the neighborhood. It's not very dense. It's less dense than a middle center of the city, but you can see the farming co-op. They come and grow salads and plow the land right in between the buildings. This is another neighborhood in Geneva in which we're involved. Actually, we're working on maybe 5 or 6 new neighborhoods. And here we've been able, because there's a local real estate agency, which is a citizen-owned co-op, which is going to rent out all the ground floor shops. You can apply a vision to the whole neighborhood, what we'll be able to find in the shops in different places. So this is not built yet, but this is the plan, is to try and apply a vision to the whole neighborhood. So there will be a lot of sharing space with different rooms, sharing objects. Basically, if you share objects, you possess less of your own object, but you can have access to more. We do it, of course, for mobility, cars, bicycles, cargos. For clothes, you can have a system. Everything should be repaired, try and have 0 waste. And a lot of objects you can share that you don't use every day. And this is all governed by one entity, which is the local real estate co-op agency. So essential issues I came up with when planning a neighborhood, because I realized, of course, that roads, heat, electricity, water, sewers, they're very well planned in Geneva. And there's a lot of engineers and everybody works on that. But when you talk about food, there's no planning. You just leave the free market decide. When you talk about health, basically the same thing. So what goes on in the shops and different activities in the ground floors, basically that's a free market decision. And what happens is that with this, well, in all the main cities, the most attractive ground floors, you have Starbucks and McDonald's, and a lot of neighborhoods are in decline because the shops are difficult to have them survive. So we're trying to bring different ways of animating and making shops survive. And one way, one thing it's important is that climate is an issue, but biodiversity, of course, is another issue. And I'm scared sometimes when I hear people talking just about lowering our carbon footprint, because I think that's not enough at all. We have to think differently. And there's a lot of psychological suffering in Geneva, even if it's one of the richest countries in the world. So one approach is the one I've been working on, is developing nonprofit citizen-owned cooperatives. Food co-ops are, of course, good for mental and physical health. It brings the neighborhood to be more resilient to future crises, and we saw it with the COVID crisis. And it helps local farmers. Pooling goods and services, sharing, it's more with less. Waste should become resources. There's a lot of ideas and work on that aspect. One idea as well is to reduce health costs through free first consultation paid by citizen-owned health insurance cooperatives, and work with your neighbors. So that's a lot of the ideas. Of course, I don't have time to develop, but maybe you will have some questions. And this is my last slide. So I came up with this image. The neighborhood is a sample of human society. A ground floor window is a view on our society. So a future neighborhood is a sample of our future. And programming future neighborhoods, that's what we're working on, especially as shops and activities, boils down to programming the future. So I think we have a huge responsibility, all actors working on neighborhood and planning. This is a neighborhood built in 2020 in Geneva. This is more like 1900 architecture, and everybody sees which one he would prefer to go and visit or live in. And that's my last image. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Benoit, for a very interesting and detailed presentation on what happened in Geneva eventually has been upscaled, and also taken up the important aspects of urban food security, which is often neglected in the whole sustainability context. I'm glad that it has been mentioned. There have been a few questions, from the audience. There is one both for both for you and as well as for Suchitra as well. And one thing is that to Suchitra, Patricia talks about, Canela, who is in the audience, says interesting point on the changes in indicators. So what are the practical suggestions? Do you have the construction industry's decision-making challenges she would like to know? And also wondering if construction industry's role in this transition, are they coming up with solutions? For example, low carbon concrete is something that Suchitra will talk about. Then, of course, to Benoit, there is a question to see that the materials and the role of construction industry, material suppliers, the supply side, to what extent this has been, addressed. And Suchitra, there's also a question for you, saying that a recent study shows that the city of Bangalore, India, is subsidizing due to groundwater depletion. How do you influence site selection processes in real estate developments as a private AEC consultant, especially in such dense metropolitan areas where land is a luxury? So there are some questions that you'd like to sort of respond to, both from Patricia as well as from Bhuvana. Also from my side, it's interesting that Benoit mentioned about the construction of houses using wood. A good example is in Norway. There's a place called Mjøstårnet, which is an 18-story building. It's the second highest building with about 85 meters. Of course, the tallest wooden building is timber hybrid high-rise apartment is about 284 feet or 87 meters is in Wisconsin. So there are some examples of how wood is becoming a more interesting material, replacing concrete. To what extent that also depends upon access to wood and those kind of issues. Yeah. Then one also question I'm looking into, when you're talking about sustainability in housing, carbon footprints, what can we learn from the past? You know, the people have lived for generations, living in houses being an important aspect of shelter, being an important aspect of life. They have been adapting, inventing, innovating over hundreds of years of generations to see how, for example, developing what is called as vernacular architecture, traditional architecture, using culture and architecture. Are there ways in which the modern technology, reducing carbon footprints, can benefit from the value of knowledge that has been accumulated over the period of past periods among indigenous communities and people in the global south? So I leave the questions there. Maybe I'll leave first to Benoit to answer the questions that were addressed to him. Then I'll ask Suchitra to respond. Here you are, Benoit. I don't know, you got the questions, okay?
Okay, thank you. Well, I got the materials, the wood, and the learn from the past.
Yes.
So I can try those. Yes, of course. We had an assessment of the, it's called the énergie grise, the embedded energy footprint of our buildings. And we see that with when you have highly energy efficient buildings, the embedded energy component becomes greater. It's bigger than actually the energy needed to build during the 2 years of construction is higher than the energy used to heat the building, even in the Geneva climate, over 100 years, which is so it becomes a very, very important issue. So of course you're going to look for you're going to look for materials that come from close by. You don't have to carry them from far away. We also work with the land that is moved. This is also the community planners, when you have a construction site, they try and avoid moving land, the earth, far away to keep it close and reuse it. So sometimes we even raise the level of the land, so that because you're digging a lot, so the average level raises a lot, so that you don't have to move earth away. And of course, the materials are important. There is research on low carbon concrete and concrete. Actually, we've got one building which is concrete mixed with earth, with local earth. You can mix it with a 80% local earth. And we're also building with as you saw, with straw bales as insulation. We try to have local products for the insulation. And there's also even local earth without concrete, as is built in many North African countries, where they use earth which is not cooked. So that's very low energy, and we don't have, it's not sufficiently strong yet as a technique for high buildings, but we use it in indoor walls. And thank you for the question on wood. Yes, it definitely is the main material we try and put into our buildings, because of course wood is a carbon stuck. So it's embedded, and the embedded carbon in the wood doesn't go back into the atmosphere, but it comes from the atmosphere. So plants take CO2 and they make it into wood. And if you put the wood in your buildings, then you keep the CO2 out of the atmosphere. So of course and it's also nice to have wood inside. If you can see but there's it's blurred, but my roof here is wood. The whole building I'm in is made of wood. So that's it's very nice to live in such a building. And definitely learn from the past, especially with the heating. And everybody in Geneva and most places in the world, of course, we feel the climate change and the heating it's hotter. And so there's a lot you can learn from places where they live in hotter climates. And I suppose in India there's a lot, but here we try to have a lot of shading, sun shading in the summer, and night cooling. So you make openings and at the bottom of the building and in the roof, so you can have air circulation during the night. And that makes you can cool building during the night. Of course, you need to have cooler temperatures during the nights for that to work, but that's still the case in Geneva, so it's quite nice. That's it.
Thank you, Benoit. Excellent explanations. And maybe they can, Patricia can write anything on any comments or the answers you have received. We could proceed with the discussions that we had. I'm glad you appreciated the presentation from Benoit as well. Yeah. Now, may I then request Suchitra to respond to some of the questions that you raised.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
So I'll just break it down and start with how do you see the construction industry role in the transition? I think it is paramount, with the fact that we are one of the most important stakeholders who are able to drive decisions to impact and influence anything that happens on sustainability and climate change. So climate action is very, very important, and that is where our role is paramount. Are there coming up solutions? Example, low carbon concrete. So I think the solutions are there. We are using those solutions for sure. The world is evolving, and I think the solutions will keep evolving. But when we specifically talk about low carbon concrete, for example, when we work on projects that I've been talking about, we get a very clear direction in terms of set KPIs and matrices where they talk about the kgs of CO2 per metric ton for a specific category of material. So for example, for a concrete, different types, there is a specific number to it. So once we get that KPI, we work backwards with the suppliers to understand where they stand on in terms of low carbon impact of concrete. Now, what happens is, if I have to just break it down into a few things where you can see the impact, one is about raw material extraction. Second is about the production. How cleaner is your facility where the production is happening? And then it is about the transport. So generally we measure it cradle to gate at this point in time, wherein we understand where it's coming from, how you're producing the material to be used in the facility, and how you're transporting it. So these are the three key components. And the more we can emphasize on the production side, with more renewables coming into picture and better efficient production options, I think we will get increasingly better solutions. But yes, solutions are there at this point in time. Only problem what happens is, because of the issue of demand and supply, these solutions become non-viable in terms of either availability, lead time, or cost. But I'm sure the coming few years will see a lot of change in that. We are seeing a lot of change in a lot of regions in that. I think one more question on Bengaluru. So certainly I'm right there, and I can completely understand about the depletion of groundwater. I mean, it was a city of lakes, and unfortunately people like me have come into the city and maybe influenced it, not in too much positivity, but yes. So I think in terms of influencing the site selection process in real estate developments, interestingly, I was in my previous capacity, I was in part of such site selection processes. So there are these 3-4 big developers over there in Bengaluru. So we used to actually carry out these pre-assessments for them when they were developing, especially any of the commercial properties. I mean, residential still has not seen that much influence that early. I mean, there are a lot of other dynamics that come into play, but especially for the commercial developments, sustainability becomes a very, very important criteria. So a few of the key things that we look at in terms of sustainability indicators right at the start are certainly the environmental and social impacts that we are carrying, that we are having, that come inherently with a development in that particular place, and then comparing it with multiple other sites. So that becomes very, very important. Second key component is, if we cannot, we don't have the luxury of space, certainly. So how vertical can we go? I mean, that becomes second very, very important component. And how efficient can we be in terms of the whole mass that we are trying to develop. So I think these are the three key components that we look at, and then we expand from there into multiple other indicators that can be there. And even with all the kind of analysis that we carry out, I completely agree with the kind of urbanization that happens in such cities, which makes it very, very certainly difficult and perplexing situations for people. But yes, I mean, this is the way to go. And the more we start streamlining sustainability and the decisions, I think we should be the people who should be sitting in the center of the table. I mean, something that I keep saying, and center of decision making when all such things are happening or all such talks are happening. They should not be just transactional. Unfortunately, when these transactions happen on real estate about the decision of this land or that land, sustainability professionals maybe don't come into picture, but I think that scenario is changing. And the more it changes and evolves, I think we will have better decisions for sure. So yeah, that's my take on the three things.
Small question here. What, do you think government regulations are important here? Because industry may not do change by themselves unless there is, you know, sort of government directions and support in this context.
So very, very important, absolutely. But what happens is, so I'm part of the ECBC Energy Conservation Building Code. I was part of the development process of it. We used to provide feedbacks. This is in context to India. Now it's called ECSBC. The sustainability S is brought in between, and we're developing the codes again, and they're shaping up very well. The codes have been actioned out. It was rolled out in 2007. It was actioned out somewhere around 2012-13 in multiple states. But what happens is the amount of time that a government machinery takes to get things on ground and starts evaluating, we lose so much of time that if the stakeholders involved, be it private or other developers, if they are not taking advancements into making the decisions on sustainable development, we are losing out on so much of time that if we keep waiting for government orders, I think we are past the time of a lot of development that has already happened. And that is, I think, the situation a few of the Indian cities at least are in, wherein we have actioned out things, they are not rolled out on the ground, and we are dependent on the private developers or the parties who are actually carrying out the developments to take charge of it.
Thank you. Will you agree with that, Benoit, that the municipalities and local government also have a role to play in addition to national government in sort of bringing about sustainable change in housing construction industry?
Yes, of course, definitely. Nothing that we have done, we could have done without the help of the local authorities. Definitely, you need. We've got a bottom-up approach, but we've definitely trying to work with the local authorities. And as what we've seen is at the national level, it's very difficult to get help, but in the smaller community level, we get a lot of help and sustainability-oriented politicians.
Okay, thanks. We have another minute to go. Before that, let me request Elizabeth to say a few words before Bhuvana closes the session. Elizabeth, here, word is yours.
Yes, thank you, Krishnan. Yes, thank you very much to the speakers. Out of such session, I can only say this is the start of something which we should have a whole congress around this topic. If you think of housing and real estate, I mean, I think one of the problems is people still think just about buildings, but if you talk about climate responsive buildings or housing and real estate, it goes much further. There's so many different aspects. We only touched, yes, about the different aspects, but just on the basis. It's a huge area for climate action and a responsibility, especially knowing that 70% or even a little bit more of the built environment globally still yet has to be built. So there's a lot of learning to be done. They're major stakeholders at city level too, but often missed them, even with planning. I think both of speakers pointed to indicators that also go beyond the building: social, physical, mental well-being, a big one. I can testify, in fact, the neighborhood of Verger, for instance, which is close to where I live, and my kids go there to the Scouts, that there is so much more to be said about elements of climate responsive neighborhoods. There's a lot to be said about how is dealt with the land. Very interesting constructions and methodologies and policies, sharing space also of different groups in the neighborhood, using waste as a resource, capturing water, again, is an aspect where we will also need landscape architects and that whole world, which we will have a couple of sessions on this in the Congress in Toronto. How can we capture the water and reuse it? And then with COVID, building the resilience of the community through such a neighborhood and even through the way the urban form is done. We didn't talk much about this in the session, but even the form, for instance, in that neighborhood too, people, the form of the buildings and the public space is done in a way that people connect and actually meet each other without doing much effort. And that has been such an important element also when COVID struck, that people got to know each other and they also knew who is alone, who can we help, and so on. So this is all part of this more complete neighborhoods. So yes, a lot of aspects, and thank you very much.
Thanks again. Thanks, Elizabeth. Final words, Bhuvana?
Yeah, I'm unmuting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. This topic is definitely something that's quite multi-layered and super complex, but it's also something that we need to act on immediately. So yeah, and Suchitra, I could resonate a lot with some of the experiences that you had, especially some of the experiences that you spoke of during the discussion. I lived in Bangalore myself for a couple of years, so I could very much agree to it. So in conclusion, I would like to firstly thank our speakers for all your valuable insights, your experiences, and most importantly, for your valuable time. With respect to Suchitra, I enjoyed listening about the different indicators that you use for sustainability and well-being. I also learned a lot from the digital tools that you've been incorporating in your day-to-day work for decision-making, especially with respect to climate responsiveness of the built environment. Benoit, thank you so much for sharing some light on the neighborhood cooperatives that you've been working with the past few years, especially the ones in Geneva, which, from what I understand, is one of the most expensive cities to live in. So I'm sure that you're making a very positive influence on the urban life there, which is nice and inspiring for youngsters like me. And thank you, dear audience, for joining us today. It's lovely to have a lot of people learning from such valuable and inspirational speakers. I hope you join us for the sessions later today and also for the main sessions in Toronto next month. Thank you so much once again. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day.
So
Thanks.
before we
We have
go,
a
can
moment
we?
for a picture. Can
Bye-bye.
we switch on the cameras for a picture, please? Those who are there. Aline, can you take a picture?
Yes. Okay.
Bhuvana, she's gone.
Okay. Anyone else who wants to open the camera? Yes. Okay. Perfect. Please open the cameras.
Oh, Krishnan is gone.
Great. Okay. Done. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.